My name's Mike, and I was 26 years old when this happened. I was living on my own in a one-bedroom apartment and working a boring office job. At the time, I didn't really have any friends because I had moved for work recently and didn't go out much. It was a lonely time in my life because all I really did was go to work, then the gym, and then home. I've been using dating apps on and off for a few years already, and I was checking Tinder now and then for matches. At the time, almost all the profiles looked super fake, so it was not my favorite of the dating apps. One night, however, I did get a match that looked decent. Her name was Hannah. She was 26 years old like me and had real-looking pictures with a genuine-sounding profile, something that's all too rare these days. I sent the first message and got a response right away. It was around 9 at night and I was feeling lonely as usual. After chatting for a while, I decided to shoot my shot and asked her to meet up, even though I was not expecting much. To my surprise, she said yes. She suggested that I come to her place, and as crazy as that sounds, I agreed. But first, I suggested that we talk on the phone. She agreed to that, so we jumped onto a video call, and everything looked fine. Hannah was definitely real. The background in her video was a solid black wall, though. I remember thinking that was weird. It was like she was on some kind of dark film set, or maybe she just really liked black. It didn't bother me enough to cancel, though, so after a quick conversation, I told her I was coming over. When I looked up the directions, it seemed to be pretty much all the way across town for me. Google said that it would be about a half-hour drive. No problem. I drove to the address, and it was a quiet suburban neighborhood. Although not exactly a rich neighborhood, it wasn't bad either. It seemed like a place that would be mostly families, so my first thought was that Hannah lived with her parents. That had the potential to be pretty awkward, but I figured they must be away if that were the case, so I kept driving. It was past 10 p.m., so there weren't many people around. The streetlights were on, and they were bright. When I arrived, the house looked completely dark. The front windows were pitch black, and there were no outdoor lights on either. There was a single-car garage and a driveway, but there was no car that I could see. There could have been one in the garage, though. It really looked like nobody was home, and I was suspicious. I parked on the other side of the street and sent a message. I wasn't going to just walk up to the dark house. I waited for a reply, but none came. After a few minutes, I considered leaving. It felt odd that there were no lights on, and she wasn't responding. Just as I was about to drive away, a man appeared next to my car and tapped on the window. I didn't see where he came from. He looked like an average guy, maybe around 40 years old. There was a lamppost right near us, so I could see him well. The guy had dark hair with a mustache and a red and white plaid shirt. He motioned for me to roll the window down, but I didn't want to. Something about the situation felt off. Instead of rolling down the window, I turned on my car and prepared to leave. The man's expression changed slightly when he saw me start the car. He motioned more urgently for me to roll down the window, but again, I ignored him. My instincts told me it was time to go. I put the car into gear and slowly pulled away from the curb. The man was close to my car, but as soon as I started moving, he took a step away. As I moved back into the lane, I kept an eye on the man. He stayed by the road, watching me drive. Just as I turned the corner, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw headlights turn on behind me. They followed me at a distance, but I didn't know if it had anything to do with the guy from before. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a coincidence, but the headlights remained, matching my turns and speed. I decided to test if they were really following me. I made a few random turns, looping through the neighborhood in a way that didn't make any sense if you were trying to go somewhere. The car stayed behind me, keeping my pace. Then I tried speeding up, and I took a few more quick turns. I pushed my car faster, trying to put some distance between us. Finally, after a few more sharp turns, I saw the headlights fade into my rearview mirror. I kept driving for a while just to be sure, and when I was certain they were gone, I pulled over to catch my breath and check my phone. I was creeped out enough that I had given up on the date. That address was either fake or was a setup of some kind. The man that came up to me might have even been in on it. As soon as I opened the Tinder app, the match had been deleted. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to understand what had happened. My heart was still pounding, and I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? That I went to meet somebody from Tinder and got spooked by a random guy. It didn't seem like enough to warrant a report, so I decided to head home and try to forget about it. On my way back, I kept checking my mirrors, hoping I wouldn't see those headlights again, but the rest of the ride was normal, and when I finally got home, I flopped down on the couch and took a deep breath. I opened the Tinder app again to see if I could find any trace of her profile. I swiped around a bit hoping to see it again, but it never came up. It had either been deleted or she blocked me, so I gave up and put my phone away. I sat there thinking about what might have happened, and I have a few guesses. One is that Hannah was just messing around and gave me a fake address. If that was the case, then the man could have just been one of the neighbors who thought I was the creep. Maybe he just wanted to know who I was, and maybe the car following me was just a coincidence. It really did seem to be following me, though. Other than that, it could have been a setup. What really creeps me out about that, though, is that they actually got a real girl to do the video call. It's still haunting to think of her face in front of that black background, knowing what I know now. The next morning, I called one of my friends from back home and told him about it. He was just as creeped out as I was, suggested that it might have been a setup, some kind of scam, or worse. I agreed, and I had probably dodged a bullet by leaving when I did. I was using Tinder around the time when it first came out. Back then, everyone was saying that it was a hookup app. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but that's what I thought going in. Even still, I was open to anything when I began using it. I had never been in a real relationship, so that's something I was certainly open to. When I first set everything up, I must have had some beginner's luck, because I got a lot of matches in the first few weeks. That surprised me, because I'm not tall or very handsome, although my mom might disagree with the second part. I went on a few dates and met some nice people. One of them was Annika. We went on 4 or 5 dates within the first month that I was on the app. Our first few dates were in public places. We just went out for drinks a few times, and then after that, I made her dinner at my place. There were basically no red flags at first, and we were hitting it off nicely. I was pretty excited about how it was going, but I didn't want to come off too strong, so I was trying to play it cool. We did both agree to delete Tinder though, so that was a good step. Things were progressing well. Not too fast, but I thought there could be a future there. She was fun, smart, and we seemed to have a lot in common. We were both into running and even talked about going together at some point. She was 25 years old and doing a master's in education at the college in our city. After about a month of dating, she invited me to a party at her friend's house. I was happy to go and looking forward to it, because it seemed like a good opportunity to meet more of her friends and get to know her better. The party was at a house that was pretty far for us, since we both lived on the other side of the city. We made the trip out there together. There was a bus that took us most of the way, and then we got an Uber for the last part, which probably saved us a lot of time. 2 bus transfers at least. When we got there, I mingled and met a few of Annika's friends. Everyone seemed nice enough, even though they all seemed to know each other well. I was the only outsider. I was awkward at first because of that, but as the night went on, I had a few drinks. By around 10:30, I had loosened up a lot. I was talking to some of the other guys. At one point, I found myself talking to a guy named Perry. He was friendly and easy to talk to. We chatted about work, hobbies, and the usual small talk for a while. Then during our conversation, Perry mentioned that he had known Annika for a while because they went to college together. Out of the blue, he said something like, "You seem like a good guy, so I'll give you a heads up. Annika's a bit intense, some might even say crazy." I laughed at first, thinking he was just messing with me or exaggerating. I had no reason to believe him. Annika seemed pretty normal to me. Perry kept a serious face though, and after I realized that, I stopped laughing. Then there was a tense silence between us that felt like it lasted for a long time. Right then, one of the other guys came up to us and changed the subject. I sort of wanted to probe a bit more on what Perry told me, but I let it go as soon as we were no longer on that topic. The rest of the night went by, and I left with Annika at around midnight. We continued dating, and everything seemed fine. We went out to dinner, saw movies, and spent weekends exploring different parts of the city. She was always enthusiastic and full of energy, which I found refreshing. Any thoughts of Perry's warning had long faded from my mind. It was only later that I remembered it. After a few more weeks, I began noticing some things, though. Annika would get unusually upset over minor issues, like if I was a few minutes late or didn't respond to a text message right away. At first, I brushed it off as her being passionate and overly concerned, but her reactions became more extreme. Once, when I had to cancel plans because of a work emergency, she went silent for days, then bombarded me with angry messages. Despite these incidents, I kept seeing her. There were still good times, and I didn't want to ruin a good thing over a few bad moments. But her behavior became harder to ignore. She would show up at my apartment unannounced, sometimes late at night, claiming she just wanted to see me. It was unsettling, but I rationalized it as her caring too much, rather than anything more serious. At first, I was even flattered that she liked me so much. One evening, she came over like usual, but we got into a pretty heated argument over something trivial. It lasted for hours, and I was emotionally drained by the end of it. She was angry and intense, almost in a demonic way. At one point, I thought she was playing it up as a joke. She was grunting and almost roaring with anger. Suddenly, Annika switched back to being sweet and apologetic. It was confusing, and I was getting worried. At the time, it was my only actual relationship, so I didn't have anything to compare it to. For all I knew, this was not far away from normal. I was still trying to see the best in her, ignoring the growing signs that something was off. It kept getting worse after that, though, and it became so bad that even I couldn't ignore it. She would call me multiple times a day, demanding to know where I was and who I was with. If I didn't answer right away, then she would leave frantic, angry voicemails on my phone. She began showing up at my work and made several scenes that embarrassed me in front of my coworkers. One night we had another argument. She was planning to stay over, but I told her I would rather be alone. This really set her off. She was accusing me of giving up on our relationship, and even said that I was probably cheating on her. That wasn't true at all. After another hour of arguing and crying, I finally convinced her to go. I had a basement apartment, and I walked her out, still crying. It was only 11 p.m., but I was so drained that I went to bed right away. However, I was woken up in the middle of the night by banging on my door. I sat up in bed and then listened closely. It was definitely somebody at my door. I walked over to it and looked out, and it was Annika. She was crying and apologizing, saying she couldn't bear the thought of losing me. I opened the door, let her in, and tried to calm her down. We sat on my couch and talked for a while, then at one point, I went to the bathroom. As soon as I came back and sat down, Annika pulled a knife on me. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was one of the ones from my kitchen. Before I knew it, she had stabbed me in the abdomen. I was shocked more than anything else, and I felt very little pain. It was a few seconds before I started to feel woozy, and I knew I didn't have much time. I managed to wrestle the knife away from her, and as soon as I had it, she ran away, leaving me alone and hurt. I was feeling like I was going to pass out, but I knew that if that happened, then I may not wake up. I scrambled to get my phone, almost losing consciousness every few seconds. I finally found it and called 911. With my last ounce of strength, I managed to say my address and told them that I had been stabbed. That was the last thing I remember before the paramedics arrived. They saved my life that night, and I owe them everything. Once I was stabilized, I told the police who did it to me. Annika was arrested, and she never denied the attack. From what I heard, she said that she had to do it. In the following days, I learned more about Annika's mental health issues from her friends and family. Her parents reached out to me to apologize. We had a long conversation over the phone. They seemed like really nice people, and like they had no idea that she was capable of this. They had been concerned about her for a while, but they thought her symptoms were under control. I realized that Perry's warning was more serious than I initially thought, although I doubt he ever knew it would get this bad. Either way, I regretted not taking it to heart sooner. It took some time, but eventually I began to feel safe again. I changed my logs, blocked her number, and took steps to ensure that she couldn't contact me. I've since moved on, and genuinely wish the best for her. I'm Julie, and I had been single for over 5 years when this happened. I was in my early 30s, and I had a friend who just got married to a guy she met on Tinder. This was around the year 2014, and I had just recently began to consider online dating. I never thought I would do it at first, but that seemed to be how people were meeting, so I accepted it. Not knowing much about the whole scene, I just downloaded Tinder, since that was the most popular one at the time. As soon as I began using it, I started to think that my friend had gotten really lucky, because it was not easy to meet normal guys. I met one guy who showed up on our date wearing pajama bottoms. We went to a pretty nice bar, and he walked right in looking like he had just gotten out of bed. I called it a night after one drink, for obvious reasons. Another time, I met a guy at a cafe, and when we walked in, he was already there with another girl. I guess he double booked us and got mixed up. That was when I realized what Tinder was all about. This story's about a different experience, though. It was a lot scarier than either of those. The pajama bottoms were atrocious, though. I matched with a guy named Daniel, and we decided to meet at a bar. He was a year older than me, and based on our profiles, it looked like we had a lot in common. We even went to the same college. It was a big school though, so it didn't alarm me that I couldn't remember him. I did some research on Facebook as well and couldn't find anything. I still wasn't suspicious, because there could be all kinds of reasons for that. Privacy settings, or maybe he just didn't use it. The bar he chose was a pretty standard sports bar, not far away from where I was working at the time. I knew the place well because I passed it almost every day. It wouldn't have been my first choice, but I did appreciate him for making plans. When I arrived, the place was almost empty, normal for a weekday evening. I picked a table near the back and sat down, then I sent Daniel a message to let him know I was there. As I waited, I noticed an older man sitting at the bar. He kept glancing over his shoulder at me. I noticed it right away, but it didn't stop. He was at least 50 years old, with long gray hair. I could see him messing with his phone, which was out on the bar in front of him. I checked my phone again and saw a message from Daniel. He said he was almost there. I tried to relax and took a sip from my drink. The minutes ticked by slowly, and every few minutes, another excuse came in from Daniel. First, he was stuck in traffic, then he had trouble finding parking. Finally, he said he was on his way in. I looked around the place expecting him to come in, but that never happened. All the while, the man at the bar was still glancing back at me every few seconds. I began to suspect that he might be Daniel, and the whole thing was a sick setup. I grew more uncomfortable with each passing minute. After over half an hour of waiting and getting new excuses from Daniel, I felt certain that the man at the bar was actually him. I decided to leave. As I got up, I unmatched Daniel on my phone. The man's eyes followed me as I passed him towards the exit. I didn't want to confront the man or deal with any awkward conversations. I thought that was what he wanted anyway. He probably wanted me to make a huge scene at the bar and then deny the whole thing. I didn't want to play into that, so I tried to take the high road. I didn't even look at him as I passed, but I could feel his eyes following me. I got to the exit and stepped outside. There was a friend of mine who lived nearby, so I texted her to see if she wanted to hang out. While I was waiting for a reply, I began walking. When I was about 5 minutes down the road, I glanced over my shoulder and noticed the man from the bar was following me. He kept a distance at first, but it was clear he was headed in the same direction as me. I tried to stay calm and walked a little faster, hoping he would lose interest, but I knew that if he was indeed behind the Daniel profile, then he was definitely after me. When I reached the corner, I paused to wait for a traffic light to change. I looked back and saw the man was closing in fast. Before I could make a move to run down the other street, I felt a hand grab my arm. His grip was tight, and he started pulling me towards a nearby alley. It was a dark corridor between two buildings, and I was pretty sure he was going to drag me in there. I screamed as loud as I could, hoping somebody would hear. The street wasn't busy, but there were a few people around. A group of teenagers was standing across the street, and the noise must have caught their attention. I saw one of them point towards me and say something to the others. I kept screaming as loud as I could, but my attacker didn't let go, not even a little. I could feel his fingernails digging into my arm, and I thought he was about to draw blood from it. The teenagers quickly crossed the street, and at that point, I knew they were coming for me. The man tried to pull me in faster, but he must have seen the teenagers, and that made him hesitate. "Hey, let her go, man," one of the teenagers yelled as he closed in on us. There were 4 of them, and they were all boys. He looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. His grip loosened, and I took that opportunity to yank my arm free. The man backed away, glaring at me and the teenagers, and he turned around and walked away down the street. One of the teenagers, a tall boy with a baseball cap, stepped closer to me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, still shaken. "Yeah, I think so. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come over." I looked down at my arm, and it was red, but not bleeding. I could see some distinct fingernail marks on it from where he was grabbing me, though. They were deep, and my arm still hurt. The group stayed with me for a few minutes, making sure I was all right. They offered to walk me to my friend's place or call someone for me, but I assured them I would be fine. One of them gave me his number just in case he needed to be a witness, and I thanked them again. They did wait for me while I called an Uber, though. I went straight home that night and didn't even call the police right away. I was honestly so shaken that I didn't even think to do it. When I called my mom, though, she told me that I had to call the cops. Only then did I report the whole thing. I know how stupid it sounds that I didn't do it right away, but I wasn't thinking straight. I don't know exactly how they did it, but the cops found the guy the next day. Whether the bartender knew him, or there were some cameras somewhere, I don't know, but he didn't cover his tracks very well. He was in fact behind the Daniel profile, and the whole thing was a setup for me. We never found out if he did it to anybody else, or if this was the first time, and I never found out why he did it. The really scary thing, though, is what he would have done to me in that alley.